Okay, back at it again with the man from the Action Network. Big bets on campus, and you can find him firing off tweets all weekend long when football's going. And he told everybody it seemed bleak, it seemed ugly, but Hammer, Dabo Sweeney, and the Clemson. And as Dabo said after the game, you better buy that fucking stock because Clemson is coming. I don't know about that, but Clemson did beat Notre Dame. Stuckey, what's up, bro?
Hey, what's going on, brother? Yeah, it was a cruel Sunday though. I had the Cowboys. Chiefs got there easily, but I had the Cowboys who I don't know how they didn't win the game. They did everything that I thought they were going to do, but racked up 500 yards of offense and just kept failing at the goal line over and over and over again. Couldn't even not step them out of bounds and get the two, which would have pushed.
It was crazy.
And then I had the Texans who didn't have a kicker, and I knew that they weren't going to kick the extra point. So yeah, that's what happens on some NFL Sundays. It's an oblong ball. Sometimes it doesn't bounce your way. But we're on to week 10 in the NFL and week 11 in college football. It's crazy.
Yeah, as Belichick would say, coming out of the young lady's house, we're on to Cincinnati.
We're on to Cincinnati.
Yeah. And what's crazy is like the Texans thing, while it really sucks, at least you go, well, their kicker's injured. They kicked a field goal with like a DB or whatever. When that shit happens as a gambler, you're kind of screwed. The Cowboy thing, it's like, how do you not run the route into the end zone an extra 6 inches? Dak Prescott, like, I'm sorry, you can't step out of bounds on that play, leap at the 4-yard line, do whatever. You just can't. Like that. That was the worst loss for a good team like I can ever remember that needed. Like my whole take coming into that game was like, when's the last time McCarthy had a win where the Cowboy fans were like, that's my fucking coach? And he was about to get one. But he didn't. And it's like, oh, great loss. I mean, that's like defines the Cowboys. Great loss.
Yeah, basically ends the division too. And yeah, I mean, look, the thing that's the worst part about the Houston game was that there was a fumble. Tampa had a fumble. 3 guys were around it for Houston, all missed it, and it bounced right in Evans's hands, and they scored a touchdown. If you get that fumble, the game was over. And then I had to watch the Eagles recover all 3 of their fumbles that magically.
Yeah.
So it's one of those days. But yeah, I agree with you. Dak couldn't, like, that's always been the knock on him, and he played awesome. And they just ripped apart the Eagles, especially in the slot. CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson went nuts. But Dak has just never been able to make that key play when it counts. And, you mentioned going out of bounds. You mentioned the route short. The biggest thing is you're first and goal at the 6. Got down there somehow in 20 seconds from like your own 10. You have 4, and you've thrown for 400 yards. They cannot defend you. They're lost. No. You have 4 shots in the end zone. No matter what you do, you cannot take a sack there. So yeah, it was a frustrating game to bet. It was horrifying to watch that game. But yeah, for the Cowboys, like the doubts will creep back in when they, whenever they face one of the top teams in the NFC. It seems like they're just a one little tier below. Can they break through? We'll see. But that was about as well as they can play. And the Eagles didn't play well. Granted, they got unlucky, with fumbles and other things, but again, can't get there.
Totally agree. I mean, when you lose a game and your quarterback's awesome, it's just a huge kick in the dick. Like Notre Dame, like they get kind of shoved around by Clemson. Well, their quarterback looked like an undrafted free agent. Like you're not against that defense on the road. Even if you wanted, we talked about last week, Dabo, they have lost some pretty crazy games this year. And that defense clearly has a bunch of NFL guys. And Sam Hartman, who, through a couple games, it was like, damn. And I remember texting some of my NFL buddies. They're like, I had like a 7th undrafted free agent, that type grade on him transferring. But, eyes are open now this tough stretch. And he's a guy that went through that tough stretch. And even though they won some of those games, I would say Sam Hartman's stock didn't budge much into people that had a lot of questions on him.
Yeah. Yeah. Now the quarterback has a great day and you don't win. I'm just as a better. The best 2 quarterback performances last week were Dak and Stroud. And I didn't cash either of those bets as a dog point favorite. So yeah, it's painful, but yeah, the questions remain, and rightfully so, about this Dallas team. And there's not many teams in the conversation in the NFC, right? And Dallas is supposed to be one of them, but the questions will remain, and rightfully so.
Yeah, to me, the NFC is just I mean, we'll see it with the Niners this weekend if they can get back, adding Chase Young. The Lions have a big game against the Chargers. Honestly, it's not a great slate in terms of just on paper matchups. That to me is one of the more interesting games. The NFC with the Eagles, who have just not really been right all season, but they are even going through this tough stretch. If they get to 13, 14, like they're just probably going to have the number one seed, I guess, unless this is a big week for the Lions. But the Niners and Cowboys with some just shitty losses have kind of played themselves out. And let's face it, like even if the conference is nowhere near as deep as the AFC, which is clearly taking shape. I mean, the Bengals currently, because they've lost division games, are in last place. They look like arguably the best team in the league right now. It's just a lot harder in the AFC. I mean, some of those first round games are going to be fucking hard, right? In the NFC, some of these matchups, I think the wild card teams are going to be favored, right? With like the Niners and the Cowboys potentially against like the Saints, and I don't even know who the other, if they had to play, like if it was Niners at Seattle, let's say, right? It could just, so it's going to be very fascinating to watch that all play out just because, and it's what we thought coming into the season because the better quarterbacks were in that conference. Like even the Chargers, listen, I'm never going to get behind Brandon Staley, but they win this weekend. They're clearly alive, right?
Yep. Yeah. They're right. Because then their schedule for the next 3 or 4 weeks, besides the Ravens, is pretty easy. The Lions, I think the Lions need to get the one. Like the Lions aren't going outdoors with Goff and winning against any elite teams in the NFC. So
but even the two seed would get you multiple home games.
Yes, 2 seed would be big. 1 seed obviously would be huge. So that's really important for Detroit. The other teams in the NFC are pretty well. The way that Dallas is playing, I think that they actually they don't want to play like a physical game with San Francisco or Philadelphia outdoors in the winter. So it hurts them even more now that they can't win that division and get the 1 seed. So yeah, I think this is an important couple games for San Francisco. I think they'll ultimately be fine. But I think it's either San Francisco or Philly that comes out of the NFC. We'll see if anyone else can emerge. But yeah, not the greatest slate this week, but I think there's some bettable games out there.
Well, let's start. I kind of looked at it. I mean, it's not an easy week to bet. Let's start with the Packers, who are just, it's pretty clear this quarterback's not going to be their guy. I would bet against him being their starting quarterback in 2024. But unlike the Giants, they didn't financially fuck themselves with a crazy contract or even pick up his 5th-year option. So it's pretty easy to pivot. They beat the crap out of the Rams, who clearly are pretty terrible. So I don't quite know what to make of them. But the Steelers, it's just really hard to trust that offense. Now, Minka's out still, but that pass rush, Jordan Love on the road, it's hard. I mean, I was all in on the Steelers early in the season. They've shown some signs of life, but they're just a hard team to feel comfortable betting. Who do you like in this game?
Yeah, I took the Packers plus 3.5. The Steelers, look, they've been, on Action Network, we do these things called luck rankings that look at like everything, turnovers, red zone performance, fumbles, just every potential metric that kind of looks at your expected wins versus what your actual wins are. Through 9 weeks, the Steelers are the luckiest team ever since we've been doing this. They are 5-3. They have an expected record of 2-6. Like this is a team that is 5-0 in 1-score games. The Ravens had all the drops. They got the defensive touchdowns against the Browns. I mean, they've been outgained in every single game this season. One of only 32 teams in NFL history that's happened to in 100 years, and they're 5-3. The only team that's had this.
Who's better if they played on a neutral site? Who would you put your money on, them or the Browns?
Oh, the Browns. I mean,
because the Ravens and Bengals are clearly better to me than both those two teams.
Yeah.
And it's just what one of those two teams is going to. I mean, one of those two teams is probably going to be a playoff team, right?
Yeah, Browns. I mean, I think the Browns are the best defense in the league. Like the Browns secondary sets them apart from the Steelers. And I mean, the Steelers without Minkah Fitzpatrick, it's not that great of a secondary. And I mean, the Browns now have offensive line injuries, but both, Watson just isn't the same. Both offenses are pretty similar and very limited, but the Browns have an elite defense. The Steelers defense is just middle of the road. They have, guys in like
good pass rush
Smith who can change games and win them on their own. But overall, I'd take the Browns. I think right now the Ravens are the best team in the league. I'm not just saying that as a Ravens fan. But Yeah, and the Bengals are emerging. Now, I mean, that division, as of right now, going into this week, the AFC playoffs are the division winners and everyone in the AFC North if the season ended today. But the Steelers have been extremely lucky. This offense, I mean, it's bad. Pickett somehow finds like magic in the final 5 minutes of the game.
Yeah.
But they've gone 3 and out 47% of their drives. I mean, in comparison, the Packers, 37%, and they've been a bad offense. But look, so I make these teams.
Well, say that percent one more time. The Steelers,
47%, highest in the league.
Jesus. So it's basically 50-50 shot of going 3 and out every time they get the ball.
Yeah. They've been outgained every single game. The 5-0 in one-score games. And by the way, the Packers are 1-3 in one-score games. They've had 3 losses by a combined 7 points. It's like they've been feisty. They just can't get it going in the first half for whatever reason. But you know, I cannot get to this number. I think these teams, you know, are pretty even. Like if you look at them, especially without Fitzpatrick, Packers now getting healthier on defense. You know, you had Jair Alexander who was out a bunch. You know, your linebackers are now healthy. Your offensive line had some injuries. It's now healthy. And the most importantly, Aaron Jones is now fully healthy. He finally got a full workload last week. He's your best player. They can feed him here. But I look at these teams, they're pretty similar. I mean, the Packers have 2 really good pass rushers too. Rashawn Gary's really good. They probably have a little better secondary when Fitzpatrick's out, but very limited quarterback, limited passing attack. You know, I would say Packers are the better running back, the better offensive line. Like, these teams are very similar. Low total, asking the Steelers to win by margin, no thanks. And by the way, this is when you want to fade Tomlin. Underdog, Mike Tomlin is the king, but as a favorite of more than a field goal, 55-71-1 against the spread, 43%. Only coach less profitable over the last 50 years as a favorite of more than a field goal, Mike Shanahan. He was very conservative, so he was always bad as a favorite. And sometimes that comes out in college once in a while. And as against teams that are under 500, yeah, a lot of times he's 42%. So like this is the classic fade the Steelers spot. They've been extremely lucky. 2 limited quarterbacks here, 2 limited offenses, but Aaron Jones will be able to move the ball a little bit. This game should be ugly. Give me the 3.5 all day.
I live for a spread, and we always get it because these teams, especially this year, was bound to happen once these quarterbacks were dropping like flies. I have a hard time people being critical of the Giants. Like, how can you allow Tommy DeVito? It's like, well, they came into the season with a $40 million quarterback who was overpaid, but still a starting quarterback, and their backup was Tyrod Taylor. So the 1-2 is pretty good. Like Tyrod's got to be one of the better, more capable backups in the NFL. They both get fucking hurt. What are you going to do? Like most teams don't have Brock Purdy as their 3rd string quarterback. If you get to the 3rd string quarterback, you're screwed. Now this is kind of the season from hell for the Giants. The Cowboys coming off a loss, need to get their swagger back. Already played this team, beat the living piss out of them. The spreads, this is, you know, the Giants, depending on their matchups, could get, if they play the Eagles, I mean, you could be approaching 20, 16.5. It's hard with Tommy DeVito to think that the Giants got 10 points in the bag, right?
The over-under, the team total for the Cowboys, for the Giants, the team total is 10.5. You never see a team total that low. And I would take the under at 10.5. I laid 16 and 16.5 with the Cowboys, and it's very hard for NFL teams. Like this is more of a college spread. NFL teams don't care about running up the score, right? So like, and it's very difficult to build huge margin like you do in college. But Tommy DeVito, I mean, look, he couldn't start at Syracuse. He had a transfer at Syracuse. He's the worst quarterback I've ever had rated to start an NFL game, with one exception, when Kendall Hinton, the wide receiver for the Broncos, had to start during the COVID year, and they were 17-point underdogs. I think he finished 1 of 8. But DeVito, look, he played the Jets. There was weather, and the Jets are a great day. The Giants finished with negative passing yards in the game, like -7 passing yards. Last week, they play a bottom 5 defense in the Raiders. And Aiden O'Connell, another backup quarterback. They lost 30-6 to the Raiders.
And they got the score wasn't even, it wasn't even that close.
Yeah, and so I just don't know how the Giants score here. And for what it's worth, the Cowboys, look, they should come out angry here. They don't have a look ahead. They have the Panthers on deck. And the Cowboys have already won. They beat the Jets, Patriots, and Rams by more than 17 points. Dak Prescott, and this is a super impressive stat. He's 27-11 against the spread when he's favored by 6 or more. 71%. Only quarterback in NFL history more profitable in that spot is Tom Brady. Part of that, that's not all Dak. That's this Cowboys team, and they've always had a great pass rush, good secondary. Once they get a lead over a bad team, it's over, right? Michael Parsons, they bring the pressure, and they're just going to they pin their ears
pick
back.
Sixes.
Pick
I mean,
sixes,
they just
fumbles, it spirals out of control. So as long as the Cowboys get a lead here early, it's over. I don't know how the Giants would get it. You got to have Barkley break an 80-yard run. You got to have fumbles, fumbled kicks.
Why would you put 11 guys in the box? Why would you even put a corner out there? No point.
Yeah,
how's Barkley going to run for 10 yards?
Yeah, it's bad. Tommy DeVito is horrendous, and it's not like the Giants have good receivers. Like there's nothing. All they can do.
Waller's out.
Yeah, their offensive line's bad too. So there's nothing that they can do here. So I laid it. I never lay it. I never lay 16 in the NFL. I think it's going to end up closing up over 17. And the Cowboys are just built to blow out bad teams because of that pass rush, because they play man and they're really aggressive. And an inexperienced quarterback, it's just over. I mean, you saw it with Dak. You even saw it against the Rams with Stafford, and then Stafford went out. You saw it against the Patriots when they won. You saw it against the Giants early in the season. And just to kind of put this into context, again, a couple weeks ago, I played the Giants plus 14.5 against the Bills in New York. That was with Tyrod Taylor, who's a starter caliber quarterback. Yeah. And the Bills defense been a bottom 5 D since their injuries. Now it's kind of a similar price for the Cowboys at home against Tommy DeVito, the worst quarterback in the NFL. And the Cowboys have a top 5 D, unlike the Bills. It's like, I think this line, I mean, I thought that Bills line was crazy, but this line should be over 17, I think. It's hard to price because, like, how bad is Tommy DeVito? I mean, I think you could argue, like, some people will say, like, he's this bad. I think he's, like, this bad. So we'll see. But I think the Cowboys come out angry here, build a lead, and then it's over from there. I don't know what the Giants can possibly do. And for what it's worth, the Cowboys offense is rolling right now. Like I talked about last week, Dak's using his legs. They're throwing on early downs. And
Lamb looks awesome. Ferguson's good.
Lamb, Ferguson has emerged. Like the offensive line's now fully healthy. You got Tyron Smith back, and that offensive line did a tremendous job against that Philly D line until the sacks late. But they were, and that's one of the best D lines in the NFL. So I think this is a route, like 35-3.
I think the Giants now with the injuries. I haven't seen the latest on Tyrod. Like he's not out for the season, right? He could
come back in a couple weeks.
Okay, so let's just assume he's out for a while. I think they're going to be in the running. We're recording this before Carolina, who's clearly not very good, but Carolina could, given their schedule, could rattle off a couple random wins. The Cowboys at Washington, then they play Belichick at home. Tommy DeVito ain't beating Belichick, and who knows? DeVito might not even be starting by then. The Packers at Saints, at Eagles, Rams. I mean, that could be an ugly game. That could be technically winnable. And then end with the Eagles, who knows? Maybe that game doesn't matter to them. But even if the Eagles were playing backups, they would win that game. I think the Giants are in major play for not just the number one pick, but just they might not win another game. And at 1 win max, like it could get even uglier. Some of the spreads against the Eagles, like at Philly on Christmas, I'm sure Philly's still playing for something there for the 1 seed. Yep. That spread could be fucking enormous.
21. Yeah, it could be 21, which is I mean, we've seen like 27 once way back, but
like, what do you think next week if let's say they lose this game 30-3? I mean, what's at Commanders next week? Are they a 10-point underdog against Commanders?
Yeah. Mac Jones,
it's ugly.
A big road favorite in New York. I mean, yeah, it's going to get ugly with the Giants. It'll be a race with them and then the Bears, because the Bears have their pick and the Panthers pick. So. Yeah, and then Jones isn't going to be like I don't know when Jones is going to be ready, but that just and you can't predict injuries. That was just a bad luck thing, but that contract just looks worse and worse.
It's a disaster. It's a disaster. They would have been better off just playing it out the franchise tag so he tears ACL, and then you're just done with him.
Yeah.
The only way it's not a disaster though, if it does lead them to the number 1 overall pick, because Caleb can bitch and moan all he wants about not going, like he would definitely want to go to the New York Giants, right? I mean, that's cha-ching. So that would be, and it could, let's face it, Dayball went from easy guy to root for to like, are we sure that these guys know what they're doing? And that could save the guy's career, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. No, I mean,
or
now
even if they get the
you're a
second
Giants
pick to
fan,
get Drake May would be a big deal for them.
Yeah, you're a Giants fan. You want to lose every game.
Big time. Okay. Obviously, Joe Burrow's kind of flexing his muscles right now as one of the best players in the sport. CJ Stroud, like, let's face it, Ohio State guys, before that Georgia game, obviously he's a good player, but it's kind of like the Alabama thing with Tua and Mac. It's like, well, his team is so much better. His receivers are so sweet. And then that Georgia game, he's kind of parlayed that Georgia game into like, I'm a playmaker. I mean, I went back and watched all his passes in that, and I understand Tampa's, Todd Bowles, who's an awesome defensive coordinator. You put him at head coach, his defense doesn't look like it does when he's the coordinator. But still, I mean, some of those throws, that layered throw toward the end of the game that ultimately led to the touchdown in the corner at like the 11-yard line was like, damn, that looked like Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes. So CJ Stroud, I think, feels like the lock offensive rookie of the year, and just like a guy who's going to change that franchise. Him and D'Amico going to be a tandem for a long time. Cincinnati's kind of been rolling high, kicking ass, taking names the last 2 weeks. I mean, obviously kicked the shit out of the Niners. I thought last week the score was closer than the actual game that I witnessed because they shoved the Bills around. There's a big spot for the Texans, who a couple weeks ago I bet on them and they let me down. Who they lose to? Was it Carolina?
Carolina.
That was one of those. This game though, it's hard. Like, have they arrived, or are they just like a year? Are they a 7-10 team? And then next year, when they get some more picks, more free agents, they're competing to be a wild card spot. I don't know. I mean, I think this week's a big week. They go in and even just play tight. Maybe you got to take them for real as a playoff contender.
Yeah, I think Stroud is for real. I also think Tank Dell is for real. He's
stud.
He's amazing.
Did you know about that guy in college? I didn't know that much about him.
I loved him at Houston. He was just an absolute machine. He's like a mini Tyreek in and how he can juke and get separation.
Feels like, remember when the Colts took T.Y., different player, but it was like, Jesus, this guy's good. Yep. That's what this guy, you got this guy in the third round.
Yep. You could see it right away in his first game. But Stroud is playing. I mean, he's on pace to have one of the best rookie seasons in the history of the NFL for a quarterback. This offense is playing really well. And it all happened because of that Carolina loss. So in that game, and this has happened a few other times this year, Slowick, who's used to be with the 49ers, Shanahan disciple. Sometimes he wants to establish the run, because and the 49ers can always do that. You have good backs and good offensive line, but the Texans can't really run it this year. Pierce doesn't really fit the scheme, and then your backups aren't that good. So against Carolina, he just kept trying to run it.
The Niners also have a blocking tight end in Kittle and a fullback in Juszczyk, so they got like 7 offensive linemen.
Yeah, and the best left tackle in the NFL. And like one of the best running backs. Like the Texans don't have that. They were at the Panthers, they just kept trying to run it. And then it's like, please open up the offense. Last week, all early down throws, and they gave Stroud the keys, and they
let him sling it.
Threw for 450 yards. D'Amico came out after and said, yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to rely on our strengths. So I'm confident they're going to come out here and let Stroud throw. And this Bengals defense is vulnerable. Look, they lost both their safeties from last year. Last year, they played like 10 backup quarterbacks. Their coordinator is very good in Arumo. But the secondary, I think, is overrated. Look, they've been getting so lucky, their defense. You meant go back to the 49ers game. The 49ers had 460 yards in that game, for what it's worth. McCaffrey fumble inside the 10. You had a freak pick by the defensive lineman. Go back a week before that. The Bills also freak fumble in the red zone.
Purdy threw for 350 yards in that game.
Yeah, torched them. Back to Seattle Cincy game. Seattle doubled up Cincy in yards, had 400 yards, only scored 17 points. They didn't score in the red zone 5 times. The last 2 drives ended in the red zone with no points, turned it over on downs. They have been getting so lucky. So if you remove, so you can look at, EPA per play on defense. Bengals around middle of the pack defense. But if you remove turnovers and the impact of turnovers, which a lot of times are just fluky, they dropped the 25th, 24th against the pass. So this defense is vulnerable, and they've been getting away with it. It's also a bad spot for Cincy. Come off that big win against the Bills. You have the Ravens next week. Could come out a little flat here. Jamar Chase also might not play, which would be huge. So you can get it. There's a +7, -115 out there. I pay for the 7 up to -120. I think it's worth it in this spot. And Zach Taylor, he's only 2-5, small sample size, 2-5 against the spread as a favorite of a touchdown or more. When they get a lead, they get a little bit too conservative, and then they don't let Burrow cook. And Burrow's cooking now. I mean, the Burrow's all the way back. This is going to be one of the best offenses in the NFL, especially when Chase is healthy. The first 6 weeks when Burrow was rusty and dealing with an injury, you can look at yards above replacement adjusted for opponent. You combine all 6 of Burrow's first starts, he was a total of 2 yards above a replacement level quarterback. 2 yards over 6 weeks. The last 2 weeks, plus 168, last week plus 192. So yeah, the Bengals offense all the way back. They're going to score here, but if they're like up, then I think that Houston's going to come out here and throw it. From everything I saw last week, all the post game comments, and they should be able to throw it on this Bengals defense. But even if they're behind, Stroud can still keep up. They'll start to pass more, and then the Bengals start to go a little bit more conservative. They start to run it. They'll punt it on like 4th and 1s. You see some of that with Shanahan and San Fran too sometimes, which is why in the past at times they haven't been great as favorites of a touchdown or more. So I just think that this is getting a touchdown with Stroud and the way this offense is playing against a defense that's been running a little too good, and it's just a good situational spot sandwiched in between Buffalo and Baltimore, and then the Chase injury. Like, even if he can go, he's probably not going to be 100%. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Makes it a lot easier on that Houston secondary. So yeah, I'll take this Houston offense, Stroud in a good spot, catching a touchdown right now. Even if they're down 10 late, I have full confidence they can get in the back door. But I think this will be a pretty competitive game, especially if Chase doesn't play.
Anything on Raiders Jets? Obviously that the first time interim head coach, you get a huge jolt. I love the Giants, and that you knew about 5 minutes into that game that was the wrong side. The Jets, I mean, you talk about whatever game you were talking about earlier today, they just didn't get the fumbles or whatever. I mean, the Jets could have had a couple picks, some fumbles just didn't quite go their way in that game against the Chargers. I wonder if that looks a little different against Aiden O'Connell, right? Do they get some of those? That's just a fascinating game. I mean, on paper, people are like Jets Raiders. I can't wait to watch that thing, because whoever wins is actually going to be feeling pretty good, especially if the Raiders win. You're like, God, is this team kind of alive now under Antonio Pierce?
Yeah, we'll see if you would have to imagine that going from
they hated that guy. They can't stop talking about how much they hate the guy.
Yeah, but then the question is like, it was Tommy DeVito, right? So
exactly.
So we'll learn a lot more this week. And look, what the Raiders do on defense is Max Crosby's a monster. And he'll make all the Raiders do is they say, you're not going to get explosive plays. It's very smart by their defensive coordinator, Graham. They say, you're not going to get any explosive plays. We don't have great secondary. We don't have great linebackers. So you're going to have to work your way down the field. And then hopefully by that time, and it's worked. It's kept them in games. All their games are like, besides last week, they're like 20-17, 20-6. They're all like low scoring games. And then hopefully, eventually Crosby will make a play, or Peters will jump a route, or you'll, have an incompletion, or then you have to kick a field goal. That's what they're doing. So quarterbacks that can efficiently move the ball down the field with an efficient passing attack against elite quarterbacks, it's good. It's good. It's problematic for the Raiders. I mean, you saw that against Buffalo. Buffalo just destroyed them.
Annihilated them.
Zach Wilson's not capable of doing that. Zach Wilson's numbers against zone are and that's all the Raiders run pretty much. Cover 3 are horrifying, and he's just not.
It's why when the Chargers went up 7-0, I didn't understand. I understand you can't run the ball. Like the only way the Jets are going to be able to score is if you throw it and it tips off a hand. You get a pass rush fumble. I would ran it 3-and-out punt, 3-and-out punt. You will win the game.
Yep.
And he had 21 pass attempts in the first half, and the Jets were kind of hanging, like close couple pick sixes and fumble sixes. Like, you guys are playing into their hand. That's the only way they can survive.
Yep. Yeah, you got to feel bad for the Jets, because they've played all these top quarterbacks, and they've played them all extremely well. No one's – I mean, what did Herbert have, like 130 yards last week? So, yeah, so I don't think the Raiders' offense is going to be able to do much. I don't think the Jets' offense is going to be able to do much. So, who's going to make the mistakes? Can Zach Wilson stay out of his own way? Yeah, I agree. It should actually be an intriguing watch. I think Zach Wilson's a 1-point favorite. If I had to, I just don't think Zach Wilson should ever be a favorite on the road. But I don't have a strong feel. It'll basically come down to like which quarterback makes a bigger mistake, the Jets defense is more likely to force it, but Zach Wilson is more likely to make it. So it's intriguing that aspect. And also, I want to see how this Raiders team just continues to respond. So I probably won't bet it, but we'll be interested to watch.
Yeah, I'll get you out of here on this. If I would have told you start of the season that USC was getting 15 points going to Eugene, you'd be like, Caleb either left the program, got hurt, right? And I honestly, after they lost last week, I thought he might just be like, okay, I'm over this. Technically, they're still alive. I mean, if they were to win this game, they could still go to the Pac-12 championship game. But that's a lot of points for a guy that's clearly pretty talented. Now, that's a tough place to play, and that team a couple times have came out like gangbusters at home. But 15 points, Caleb Williams, seems like that extra point. It's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, look, last week USC, the defense was embarrassing, as it has been all year. And Washington actually had a smart game plan because USC's secondary isn't bad. Washington has been running it all year, and they ran it, and they just weren't touched. And Alex Grinch never adjusted. USC came out with 2 defensive linemen and just said, we're going to take away the pass. And Washington said, we're going to run it. And USC never did anything. And then Alex Grinch got fired. But that game last week, I mean, if you look at the final score, I'm still surprised USC didn't get in the back door. Like they kind of just faded away late. But Washington, and DeBoer is a great coach. Late first half, 4th and 6, goes for it. Touchdown. Caleb, sloppy mistake. Fumble, under a minute. Touchdown, Washington. 14 points right there, which is the difference in the game. Because USC's offense did whatever it wanted. I mean, that game looked
like they were going to score 100 points based on the first half. You're like, this game's going to be 75-70.
It was insane. If you look at USC's last 20 runs in that game, they had one that went for 1, one that went for 0. All the other runs were for 10 or more yards. Like it was.
Oregon's a lot better on defense, obviously.
Yeah, Oregon's a lot better on defense. I also just worry. Well, like there's 2 things. I don't know. I probably won't bet this game because one, like, what's USC going to do on defense? I don't know. Like, can you really make that many changes?
No, you can't.
That's going to be. You can't really change like week 10. But it's a defense they just don't tackle, right? Like the amount of missed tackles and just laziness. So like without Grinch, do they play? Just as the defense come out more fired up and inspired, and then you make some more tackles because I mean, like Oregon on paper is one of the best offensive lines. Bucky Irving, they're just going to run right over them, and then you have Bo Nix too. But at the end of the day, you're getting 14.5 with Caleb. I just don't know where their heads at after last week, and they've played 9 weeks in a row. Their bye doesn't come until before the Pac-12 championship. And USC fans were saying before the year, like, "Oh yeah, we have a bye to get ready for the Pac-12 championship." You're not going to be there, but they played like every week. They're the only team in the country that hasn't had a bye, I believe. So they got to be pretty exhausted.
That's pretty wild. Yeah.
And so I just don't know.
The only thing that makes me nervous about taking SC, because that's a lot of points, would be if they get down pretty big in like the first half, they basically quit. Their season would be kind of over, and that's definitely on the table with their head coach. They feel like they got quit written over them, starting with Lincoln.
Yeah, and the thing with USC is that Caleb Williams has so the defense is so bad. So like every competent team that you play scores every possession, right? Go back to Cal. Cal put up 49, went for 2, would have won if they got it. And then Williams, his receiving core isn't as good as it's been. The offensive line isn't as good as it's been.
Terrible.
So it's basically on him, and he's almost keeping up, but he has to make all these plays. So, a lot of it's scrambling, creating room. He's got to hold the ball, create room. 1 fumble, like last week. 2 fumbles, or 2 or 3 mistakes like Notre Dame. Then it's a blowout.
Multiple score swing.
Perfect, because if he's any mistake, it's 7 right away to the other team, and then you're down 2 scores, and you're never going to close the gap. So that's the risk playing when you play USC against it. But over 2 touchdowns, I'd probably take USC or nothing. But I'm not betting that team. I bet them twice this year, which was twice too many.
Yeah, I'm gonna sleep on that one. Okay, Stuckey, let's have a good week and fucking get the Texans back on the winning circle.
Absolutely. Have a good one. Talk to you next week.
Later.